I realized the man I slept next to was slowly poisoning me. Every meal was a threat, every kiss a lie. I had to escape my own home and orchestrate a takedown before my loving husband could finish the job. This is how I survived him. My name is Grace Wallace, and my husband just threw me the most incredible party to celebrate my promotion. Our home, a sprawling modern marvel nestled in Mosman with a view of the Sydney Harbour Bridge twinkling in the distance, was filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of polite conversation. Friends, family, business partners, they were all there, raising a toast to me, the new COO of Wallace Holdings. And at the center of it all was my husband Ethan, his smile as bright and reassuring as the lighthouse at Watson's Bay. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, the perfect host, the perfect husband. He brought me a plate himself, a beautiful arrangement of lamb tagine, my absolute favorite, a dish he'd spent all afternoon preparing. "For my brilliant wife," he whispered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You deserve the world." But as the rich, aromatic steam of the tagine drifted up to me, I didn't feel joy. I felt a primal, gut-wrenching terror. My smile became a porcelain mask, threatening to crack. A single, horrifying image flashed through my mind. My beautiful cockatoo, Charlie, lying still and silent at the bottom of his cage just last week, lifeless. And all I could think about was the special seed mix Ethan had been so lovingly feeding him. My stomach churned. I had to get away. I hurried towards the guest bathroom, murmuring apologies about feeling a little overwhelmed. But I wasn't going to be sick. I was going to save this food. I was going to save my life. Because this perfect party wasn't a celebration, it was the final act of a long and twisted play, and the main course was meant to be my execution. It's funny how your world can fracture in a single moment. Just 3 months ago, my life was something people would read about in a magazine. As the only child of Richard Wallace, the founder of Wallace Holdings, one of Sydney's most respected property development empires, I suppose I was born with a silver spoon. We weren't just wealthy, we were established. Our family name was etched onto buildings across the city. People said I had it all, but I always felt my greatest fortune wasn't the money, but meeting Ethan. He wasn't from my world. He was a scholarship kid from the western suburbs with a fierce drive and an intellect that could cut through steel. He was charming, ambitious, and most importantly, he looked at me like I was the only person in the universe. At least, that's what I let myself believe. The company he was now the CEO of, Summit Property Group, was technically a wedding gift from my father. It was a smaller, agile firm, worth about $5 million, a legacy my dad wanted to entrust to the son-in-law he adored. I was happy to step back, to focus on building the warm, loving home I never quite had growing up. Our life was a beautiful, peaceful rhythm of morning coffees overlooking the harbor, weekends sailing, and quiet evenings mapping out a future I thought we both wanted. That rhythm was shattered on a Tuesday. Ethan told me he had to attend an urgent developers conference in the Blue Mountains, about a 2-hour drive from Sydney. A last-minute thing. A key investor had flown in unexpectedly. He'd probably be gone until the weekend. I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. Our dinner plans at Quay were canceled, but I packed his bag, reminding him to watch for kangaroos on the drive up and to call me when he arrived. He kissed my forehead, that same warm, tender kiss he always gave me. "Be good, my love. I'll be back before you know it," he'd said. As I watched his sleek black Mercedes disappear down our private drive, a strange coldness settled in my chest. Our magnificent house suddenly felt like an empty, echoing museum. I wandered from room to room, my mind restless. And then I remembered it. The secluded mountain lodge my parents had bought us near Lura, a stunning retreat with panoramic views of the Jameson Valley. We rarely used it. An idea sparked. What if I drove up there, aired it out, stocked the fridge, and surprised him? The thought of the astonished look on his face was the first thing that had made me genuinely smile all day. So, without a second thought, I grabbed my keys. I had no idea I wasn't driving towards a romantic surprise. I was driving straight into the heart of a nightmare. The 2-hour drive from Sydney up into the Blue Mountains is usually my escape. As the endless gray of the city gives way to the dense, eucalyptus-scented bushland, I always feel a sense of peace. That day, with the sun warming the dashboard of my Range Rover and a playlist of my favorite Triple J tunes humming softly, the feeling was amplified. I was filled with a bubbly, almost giddy anticipation. But the beautiful irony is that while I was driving towards what I thought was a romantic gesture, I was completely oblivious to the far more significant journey I was already on a collision course with a truth that would not just break my heart, but dismantle my entire reality. To understand the depth of Ethan's betrayal, you have to understand my father. My dad, Richard Wallace, is a lion. He built Wallace Holdings from the ground up, turning a small portfolio of suburban homes into a towering empire of steel and glass that reshaped Sydney's skyline. He was ruthless in the boardroom but fiercely protective of me. After my mother passed away when I was a teenager, it was just the two of us. He was my rock, my hero. But even lions grow old. 6 months ago, he had a massive health scare. A heart condition that had been lurking in the shadows for years finally showed its teeth. The doctors told him in no uncertain terms, "Step back, or the next one will be your last." So, he did. He retired, handing over the day-to-day operations to a board he trusted. But his real plan, the one that truly mattered, was his legacy. And to him, that legacy was Ethan. He saw in Ethan the ambition and hunger he'd had as a young man. He didn't just give Ethan a company as a wedding gift. He began mentoring him, grooming him, seeing him as the son he never had. The plan was always for Ethan to eventually take a senior role at the main holdings company. My father's trust in him was absolute, almost biblical. I remember sitting in my father's study, the air thick with the smell of old leather and plans for the future, as he finalized his will after the health scare. He wanted to ensure I was secure, no matter what happened to him or the market. So he established a private trust in my name, a personal inheritance of $35 million, completely separate from the company shares. And Ethan was right there, sitting beside me, holding my hand, even suggesting clauses to the lawyers to protect Grace's interests. He knew the number. He knew every single detail. He looked my frail father in the eye and promised to spend the rest of his life taking care of me. And my dad, his eyes misty with relief, believed him. It's devastating when the people who are meant to protect you become the very ones you need protection from. I wonder if you've ever had that gut feeling that something was wrong, even when everyone else was telling you it was right. That $35 million wasn't just money. It was my father's love made tangible, and for Ethan, it was a motive, a jackpot. He wasn't just cheating on a wife, he was plotting to betray a sick old man's final, most sacred trust. The entire time he was playing the part of the devoted son-in-law, he was looking at my father and seeing a finish line. He was looking at me and seeing an obstacle. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated, long-term investment in greed. He was leveraging our love, my father's vulnerability, and the future we were supposedly building, all for a massive payday. As I pulled up to the secluded mountain lodge in Lura, the setting sun was bathing the Jameson Valley in a spectacular orange and purple glow. The air was crisp and clean. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a kookaburra. It was perfect. I remember smiling to myself, thinking how wonderful it would be to surprise him here, in this slice of paradise. The trap was set, but I was the one walking into it, completely blind, humming a happy tune. I used my key to open the heavy timber door of our mountain lodge, a sense of playful excitement bubbling in my chest. I had a bottle of champagne in my bag and a head full of romantic ideas. But the moment the door swung inward, the silence I expected was wrong. It wasn't empty. I could hear the faint tinkling melody of a children's lullaby drifting from the back of the house. My heart gave a little jolt. My eyes scanned the entrance hall. There, neatly placed on the shoe rack, was a pair of trendy Veja sneakers I'd never seen before, a size 7. And stuck to the stainless steel fridge with a cartoon magnet was a child's drawing of a stick-figure family under a smiling Sunday. My smile froze on my face. Maybe Ethan had lent the place to a friend from work and forgotten to tell me. It was a flimsy hope, but I clung to it as I crept further inside. That's when she appeared, emerging from the master bedroom. A young woman, maybe 25 or 26, with messy blonde hair tied in a bun and a tired but pretty face. She was wearing simple gray sweatpants and a soft-looking jumper. And cradled on her hip, clutching a blue pacifier, was a little boy, maybe 2 years old, with a head of familiar brown curls and my husband's deep blue eyes. My entire world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs. She looked up, startled. her expression shifting from surprise to suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. I felt like a statue. My mind was a deafening roar of white noise. Who was this woman? Whose child was this? Why were they in my house, in my bedroom? A million questions screamed for answers, but some primal instinct for self-preservation took over. I forced a smile, a brittle, painful thing. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," I stammered, my voice sounding strangely high-pitched. "I think I have the wrong lodge. Is this the Airbnb rental? My GPS must be acting up." The woman's suspicious gaze softened slightly at my well-dressed, flustered appearance. She nodded. "No, this is a private residence." "Right, of course. So sorry to have bothered you," I said, turning to make a swift exit. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. But just as I turned, the little boy in her arms began to fuss and cry. She bounced him gently on her hip, her voice dropping to a soothing coo. "Shh, it's okay, my little Noah. It's okay. Daddy Ethan will be home soon." Daddy Ethan. The two words were a physical blow, a dagger of ice that slid straight into my heart and shattered everything. I stumbled out of the lodge, closing the door behind me with a hand that trembled so violently I could barely grip the handle. The drive back down the mountain to Sydney was a blur. The stunning vistas of the valley might as well have been gray concrete walls. The initial soul-crushing wave of pain was so immense, I thought it would kill me. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I had given this man everything, my love, my trust, my family's legacy. And he had constructed this elaborate, secret life behind my back. But as the kilometers ticked by, something began to shift inside me. The searing pain began to cool, crystallizing into something harder, colder. It was rage. A pure, silent, and utterly focused rage. I realized that showing up at home, screaming and crying, was exactly what he would expect. It was a script he was prepared for. He'd call me crazy, hysterical. He'd gaslight me, deny everything, and I would be the emotional, unstable wife while he played the part of the calm, rational husband being unfairly attacked. He would win. I would lose everything. No, not this time. In that moment, I realized that the loudest scream isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes, the most devastating weapon is silence and a well-thought-out plan. Tell me in the comments if you believe that sometimes the best revenge is playing the long game. My tears dried, my hands stopped shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about a calculated fraud who had targeted my family. He had lied to my sick father. He was a threat to everything my family had ever built. My heartbreak was no longer a weakness, it was fuel. I didn't drive home. Instead, I parked on a quiet street a few blocks away, a spot where I could see our driveway. And I waited. Hours later, I saw his Mercedes pull in. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was him. "Hey honey, just got back. Exhausted. Where are you?" His voice was so normal, so loving. It made my blood run cold. I took a deep breath, composed my voice, and replied, "Hey you." Actually feeling a bit off. Decided to crash at a friend's place in the city. Didn't want to give you my germs. See you tomorrow. Love you. Every word was a lie, a carefully placed brick in the foundation of the war I was about to wage. He had no idea. The game was on. The next morning, I went home. I walked through the door to find Ethan in the kitchen, looking concerned. "Grace," I was so worried. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing over to feel my forehead. I let him. I leaned into his embrace, the embrace of the man who was actively trying to ruin my life, and I played my part. "Just exhausted, I think. This promotion is a lot. Sorry for scaring you," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a tired but loving wife. He bought it completely. For the next 2 weeks, I was the model spouse. I listened to his fabricated stories about the conference. I smiled at his jokes, and I slept beside him every night, a silent scream trapped in my throat. But while I was playing the part of Grace Wallace, the devoted wife, I was also moonlighting as a meticulous, cold-hearted strategist. My war had begun, and the first rule of war is to know your enemy. I couldn't just stumble into Isla's life. It had to be flawless, leaving no room for suspicion. I hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-federal police officer highly recommended for his subtlety. I wasn't looking for grainy photos of them kissing to use in a divorce settlement. That was small time. I wanted something far more valuable: her entire life. I wanted her routine, her habits, her fears, and her weaknesses. The dossier he delivered a week later was more revealing than I could have ever imagined. Isla's life was a curated fantasy. Her private Instagram was a shrine to the life Ethan was bankrolling. Lunches at icebergs in Bondi, designer onesies for Noah, wistful captions about being so blessed. But underneath the gloss, the report painted a picture of profound isolation. She was from Perth, had no family in New South Wales, and her social life consisted of gym classes and solo trips to the park with her son. She was living in a gilded cage, and she was lonely. That was my way in. With this knowledge, I began to build my Trojan horse. I created a persona, Anna, a successful marketing consultant who had just relocated from Melbourne to launch her own agency. Anna was everything Isla wanted to be: independent, wealthy in her own right, confident, and free. I bought a new wardrobe for Anna chic, minimalist pieces from designers Ethan wouldn't recognize. I started driving my mother's old Lexus, a car he rarely saw. I even chose a different perfume for Anna, a sophisticated scent from Le Labo, completely unlike the floral Chanel I usually wore. It's amazing, isn't it, how easy it is to become someone else if you just change your clothes and your story. I'm curious. Have you ever had to play a role in your own life to get through a difficult situation? The stage for our chance encounter was set. The investigator noted that Isla did her grocery shopping every Thursday morning at a boutique organic market in Double Bay. I arrived an hour early that Thursday, sitting in a cafe across the street, nursing a long black, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, I saw her, pushing a trolley with Noah in the child's seat. I waited until she was at the checkout, then I made my move. I timed it perfectly. Just as she was struggling to pay, her phone slipping from her grasp while Noah started to have a toddler meltdown, I swooped in. "Here, let me help you," I said with a warm, disarming smile. I picked up her phone, helped her bag her groceries, and expertly distracted Noah with my car keys, making him giggle. Isla looked at me with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver," she sighed. "Don't mention it. I have a nephew his age. I know the struggle is real," I laughed, creating a fictional backstory on the spot. We chatted for a few minutes as we walked out. I mentioned I was new to Sydney, that I was finding it hard to meet genuine people. Before we parted ways, I pulled out my phone. "Look, this is going to sound forward, but it was really nice talking to you. If you'd ever like to grab a coffee, away from all this chaos, I'd love that." I offered her an easy way out, making it her choice. Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I'd love that," she said, a little too quickly. We exchanged numbers. As I walked away, I felt a chilling sense of victory. The bait was laid. That evening, as I was sitting in my real home, looking out at the city lights, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Hey Anna, it's Isla from the market. A coffee would be amazing. Are you free next week?" I stared at the message, a cold smile touching my lips. I was in. That first coffee with Isla was a masterclass in manipulation. I sat there, in a sun-drenched cafe in Paddington, projecting an image of warmth and empathy, while every fiber of my being was screaming. She opened up almost immediately, painting a picture of a whirlwind romance with a brilliant, self-made man who was trapped in a loveless, bitter marriage. She complained about his wife, me, a cold, career-obsessed woman who didn't appreciate him. Listening to her spin this narrative was like having shards of glass pressed into my skin, but I just nodded and sympathized, playing the part of her new best friend. This personal front, this infiltration into her life, was crucial, but I knew it was only half the battle. To truly dismantle Ethan's empire of lies, I had to attack on a second front, the corporate one. I needed to hit him where he lived, in the world of numbers and contracts, and for that, I needed an inside agent. I needed Helen. Helen wasn't just an employee at Wallace Holdings. She was practically family. She had been my father's chief accountant for over 30 years, starting as a junior bookkeeper when the company was just a small office above a butcher shop. She was a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes behind her reading glasses and a mind like a steel trap. She was fiercely, almost terrifyingly, loyal to my father and the company he built. She'd seen me grow up, from a little girl playing with crayons on the boardroom floor to a woman with a seat at the table. She was a constant, a rock of integrity in the shifting seas of the corporate world. And I knew Ethan had been making a grave mistake by underestimating her. He hadn't fired her when he took a more active role. That would have been too suspicious and would have deeply upset my father. Instead, he began a campaign of quiet marginalization. He brought in a slick new accounting software, calling it an efficiency upgrade, but it was really a system designed to obscure his movements. He hired a young, arrogant finance director to act as a buffer, cutting Helen out of the key meetings she used to run alongside my dad. He treated her like a relic, a piece of old furniture that was too sentimental to throw out but too outdated to actually use. He had no idea that in doing so, he wasn't just disrespecting a loyal employee, he was creating my most powerful potential ally. I couldn't risk talking to her at the office. I sent her a discreet email from a private account, asking to meet for a coffee to discuss a personal matter related to my father's estate. We met at a quiet, historic cafe in the Rocks, far from our usual circles. I could see the concern in her eyes. She thought something was wrong with my dad's health. I started carefully, not with accusations, but with a seed of doubt. "Helen," I began, my voice low. "I've been reviewing some of the recent expense reports for Summit Property Group. Dad always taught me to follow the money, and there are patterns I don't understand. Consulting fees to companies I've never heard of, entertainment expenses that seem astronomical." I watched her face. Her professional mask was perfect, but I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had seen it too. I leaned in. "I'm worried, Helen. I'm worried that Ethan is being taken advantage of, or worse, that he's putting my father's legacy at risk." I framed it as a shared concern, a mission to protect the man she had devoted her career to. That was all it took. Her composure cracked. "I'm glad you came to me, Grace," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have been concerned for months. He's locked me out of the new system's primary accounts. The spending is reckless." In that quiet cafe, over 2 cups of coffee, an alliance was forged. Helen would become my eyes and ears. She would use her old-school knowledge and back-end access to bypass the new systems and dig up the truth. She would find every fake invoice, every padded expense, every dirty dollar. It's incredible how the quietest person in the room is often the most observant. Let me know if there has ever been a Helen in your life, a loyal, unsung hero you knew you could always count on. The war was now being fought on 2 fronts. While Anna was winning the heart of the mistress, Grace was arming her most loyal soldier for a corporate takedown. The game was getting bigger, and I was just getting started. My friendship with Isla, or rather Anna's friendship with Isla, blossomed with a speed that was both exhilarating and nauseating. We quickly became each other's go-to person. We had weekly coffee dates in Surrey Hills, took long walks with Noah through Centennial Park, and shared secrets over glasses of rosé. Of course, all the secrets were hers. She told me everything. She confessed her deep-seated fear that Ethan would never leave me. She detailed her frustration with living a clandestine life, always waiting for the weekends, always having to hide. She spoke of her dreams of a big wedding, a home in the suburbs with a yard for Noah, and the legitimacy of being Mrs. Ethan Cross. She saw me, Anna, as her supportive older sister, her confidant. She had no idea she was confessing her sins to the very woman she was sinning against. And I absorbed every word, every insecurity, every hidden desire, filing it away as ammunition. I knew that giving her direct advice telling her to demand more from Ethan would be too obvious, too risky. The most effective poison is the one the victim willingly drinks. So, my strategy was not to advise, but to influence. I decided to use the most powerful and insidious weapon in the female arsenal: envy. I began to carefully curate the life of Anna in front of her, not as a boast, but as a simple, attainable reality for a woman in control of her own destiny. I was creating a mirror that would reflect back all the inadequacies of her own dependent situation. One afternoon, we were having lunch at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the water at Rose Bay. I casually mentioned I'd just booked a 2-week trip to Bali for myself. "I'm just feeling a bit burnt out," I said with a light shrug. "It's so important to be able to just reset and treat yourself, you know? Not have to ask for permission." I saw the thought register in her eyes. Her life was entirely dependent on Ethan's permission. Later, while scrolling through my phone, I accidentally showed her a picture of a stunning Cartier love bracelet. "I'm thinking of getting this for myself," I mused. "A bit of an indulgence, I know, but I landed a huge client last month. You have to celebrate your own wins, don't you?" Every word was a precisely aimed dart. Your own wins. Treat yourself. No permission needed. I was painting a portrait of a life she desperately wanted but had no idea how to achieve on her own. I was showing her that what she considered luxury, the gifts bestowed upon her by Ethan, was simply what a successful woman bought for herself. It's a strange thing, envy. It can be a poison, but it can also be a powerful motivator. Have you ever found yourself wanting what someone else has? And what did that feeling push you to do? The shift was subtle at first, then dramatic. Isla's complaints to me changed. They were no longer just about wanting Ethan's time. They were about wanting his money, and more of it. Her demands on him escalated. The reports I was getting from Helen confirmed it. The unverified consulting fees and client entertainment expenses on Summit Property Group's accounts began to skyrocket. A $20,000 strategic planning dinner coincided with the week Isla sent me a picture of her new diamond earrings. A massive, inexplicable deposit for overseas materials matched the down payment on a luxury SUV she was suddenly driving. Ethan was bleeding the company dry to keep her happy, to keep his fragile second life from imploding. He was getting desperate, and his desperation was making him sloppy. I was using Isla as a financial wrecking ball, and she didn't even know she was swinging. The confirmation of my success came one evening via text. It was a picture from Isla of an absurdly expensive Rolex watch glittering on her wrist. The caption read, "He surprised me with it. See, Anna? He really does love me. He said it's a promise of our future." A few minutes later, an encrypted email from Helen landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Tonight." Attached was a single invoice, freshly processed, a fraudulent payment of $45,000 to a shell corporation, approved by Ethan himself. I looked at the picture of the watch, then at the damning invoice. A cold, grim satisfaction washed over me. The pincer movement was working flawlessly. I had turned his mistress into my most effective and most unwitting accomplice. While my shadow self, Anna, was busy fanning the flames of Isla's greed, I decided it was time for Grace Wallace to step back into the light. The strategy was working. Ethan was hemorrhaging money to keep his mistress happy, and Helen was meticulously documenting every fraudulent transaction. But playing defense wasn't enough. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to remind my husband and the entire city of Sydney exactly who I was. I needed to dismantle his power base not just by exposing his crimes, but by proving his utter incompetence. I approached him one evening, my expression a perfect blend of wifely concern and support. "Ethan, darling," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stared blankly at his laptop. "You seem so incredibly stressed lately. You're working around the clock. I'm worried about you." He grunted in agreement, complaining about the pressure of a big new project. "I want to help," I continued, my voice soft and earnest. "Let me come into the office, just for a bit. I can handle some of the smaller accounts, liaise with the partners. Let me take some of the weight off your shoulders. After all, it's our company, isn't it?" His fatal mistake was his arrogance. He looked at me and saw not the daughter of a property tycoon who had grown up discussing zoning laws over the dinner table, but a bored housewife looking for a hobby. The idea probably amused him. It would keep me busy, keep me close, and stop me from asking too many questions about his business trips. He agreed, giving me the patronizing title of Director of Partner Relations and a small, out-of-the-way office. He thought he was putting me in a box. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his kingdom. For the first week, I did exactly what he expected. I organized files and made polite phone calls. But I wasn't just calling to check in. I was reigniting relationships. These were men and women who had built their fortunes alongside my father. They had known me since I was a child. I didn't call them as an employee. I called them as Grace Wallace. I would start by asking about their families, referencing old memories, before subtly pivoting to business. And with every call, I was rebuilding the bridges of loyalty that Ethan had let crumble. The real turning point was the Barangaroo Renewal Project. It was a massive, legacy-defining deal that Summit had been desperately trying to land for nearly a year. Ethan had thrown everything at it: slick presentations, aggressive financial models, but he couldn't close it. The head of the investment group was a notoriously tough old bull named Mr. Thompson, a man who had been my father's fiercest rival and oldest friend. Ethan couldn't get past his secretary. I got a meeting with one phone call. I walked into Thompson's office overlooking the harbor, and instead of a laptop, I brought a bottle of 2 5-year-old Glendronach, my father's favorite scotch. Ethan had tried to impress him with numbers. I started by talking about my dad. I spoke about their shared vision for the city, about building communities, not just buildings. I didn't sell him a project. I reminded him of a legacy. 2 hours later, we shook hands on a preliminary agreement. It sent a tidal wave through the company. Ethan was forced to announce my success in a company-wide email, his words dripping with false pride. It was a public declaration that the king was no longer the most powerful piece on the board. It's a powerful feeling when you prove someone wrong, especially when they've completely underestimated you. Share a story in the comments about a time you showed everyone what you were truly capable of. The shift was immediate. Partners who hadn't returned Ethan's calls in weeks were suddenly ringing my direct line. The senior staff started coming to me for final approval on decisions. I was no longer the CEO's wife playing office. I was the true heir, and everyone knew it. That evening, Ethan cornered me in my new, much larger office. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, the charming facade finally cracking to reveal the panicked man underneath. I simply looked up from my desk, my expression calm and unreadable. "My job," I replied, my voice as cool as steel. "I'm protecting our company." He stared at me, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes for the first time. He was beginning to realize that the quiet woman he had married and dismissed was a far more dangerous player than he had ever imagined. As my influence at the company grew, a strange and unsettling shift occurred in Ethan. The tense, resentful man who confronted me in my office seemed to vanish overnight. He was replaced by a version of the husband I first fell in love with, attentive, complimentary, and deeply concerned for my well-being. He stopped questioning my decisions at work. In fact, he started praising them, calling me a natural and telling our friends how proud he was. But the most significant change was that he started cooking. Every single night. "Grace, you're taking on the world, but you're running yourself into the ground," he'd say, his voice thick with a syrupy false concern. "You look exhausted. Let me take care of you. The least I can do is make sure my brilliant wife is eating properly." He started making me superfood smoothies in the morning, filled with exotic ingredients he claimed would boost my energy. He'd prepare elaborate dinners, always something healthy and complex, and would watch me with an unnerving intensity as I ate. If this had happened a year ago, I would have melted. But now, every loving gesture felt like a threat. Every delicious meal tasted like a lie. A man like Ethan, a man cornered and stripped of his power, doesn't just surrender and become a doting house husband. He changes his strategy. He finds a new weapon. My intuition was screaming at me that something was profoundly wrong. My only true comfort in that house had become Charlie, my pet cockatoo. My father had given him to me for my 21st birthday, and the loud, clever, and affectionate bird had been my constant companion. He had a funny habit of sharing my meals, squawking until I gave him a small piece of my toast in the morning or a bite of apple from my hand. He was a fixture in my life, a small, feathered symbol of a happier, more innocent time. And it was Charlie who gave me a way to test the terrifying theory that was forming in the darkest corners of my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting this whole situation turn me into a basket case. But I had to know. I started small. Each morning, I would take a few of the chia seeds or goji berries from the smoothie Ethan made me and sprinkle them into Charlie's seed dish. At dinner, I'd slip him a tiny piece of the fish or a morsel of the vegetable Ethan had so lovingly prepared for me. A week went by, and Charlie was his normal, boisterous self. I started to relax. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the pressure was just getting to me. Then, Ethan came home with a bottle of specialist herbal vitamins. A friend, he claimed, had brought them from Japan. "They're incredible for stress and fatigue," he said, placing one in my hand. "You have to take them." I promised I would. Of course, I never did. That evening, I carefully crushed the capsule into a fine powder and mixed a small amount into Charlie's food. The next morning, I came downstairs and the house was silent, eerily, unnaturally silent. Charlie's usual, "Hello, Gracie, good morning," was missing. My heart seized in my chest. I ran to his cage in the sunroom. He was lying on the floor, his beautiful white feathers still, his bright, intelligent eyes now dull and lifeless. A strangled sob escaped my throat. It wasn't just grief. It was the horrifying gut punch of confirmation. It was true. I wasn't paranoid. My husband, the man I shared a bed with, was trying to poison me. The plan was as brilliant as it was monstrous. A slow, cumulative poison that would mimic the symptoms of a body breaking down under stress. When I eventually collapsed, the doctors would call it a heart attack, a tragic consequence of a high-pressure career. He would be the grieving widower who had tried so desperately to nurse his workaholic wife back to health. They say to always trust your gut, but it's a terrifying thing when your darkest, most paranoid thought turns out to be the absolute truth. Have you ever had an intuition so strong you couldn't ignore it, even when you wanted to? I sank to my knees on the cold tile floor, staring at the small, still body of my beloved pet. The tears that fell weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. This was no longer a game of money or pride. This was a fight for my life. Charlie hadn't just died. He had been a casualty of war, a sacrifice. And I made a silent, solemn vow to his memory that I would make the man responsible for his death pay for it in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Kneeling on the cold floor of the sunroom, with my beloved Charlie's lifeless body in my hands, something inside me broke and reformed into a diamond-hard resolve. There was no more room for grief or fear. Every second I remained in that house, I was a lamb living with a wolf. Every meal he offered was a game of Russian roulette. I had to get out, but I had to do it in a way that wouldn't raise a single red flag. My escape had to be part of his own twisted narrative. That evening, I gave the performance of my life. I came to the dinner table looking pale and frail, barely touching the beautifully plated salmon he'd made. I sighed heavily, rubbing my temples, complaining of a headache and a dizzy spell. He rushed to my side, his face a perfect mask of husbandly concern. "Grace, this is getting serious. I'm booking you a doctor's appointment tomorrow," he said, his voice laced with that sickening, feigned worry. "No," I said, my voice weak. "No, I don't need a doctor, I need to get away." I paused, letting the idea seem like a sudden, desperate thought. "Ethan, do you mind if I go to my family's old estate in the Southern Highlands for a few days? It's been so long, just to get some country air, to rest. Mom always said the air there could cure anything." I watched his eyes. For a split second, a flicker of something triumphant relief, joy, danced in their depths before being extinguished by a look of profound sympathy. He was ecstatic. My leaving would isolate me, making his job so much easier. "Of course, my love," he said, stroking my hair. "That's a wonderful idea. You go and rest. Let your old home heal you. I'll miss you terribly, but your health comes first." His blessing was my death sentence, and my escape warrant all in one. I packed a small suitcase that night while he slept soundly beside me. Listening to his steady, even breathing, I felt a wave of nausea. How many nights had he lain beside me like this, dreaming of my death? I moved like a ghost in the dark, packing not just clothes, but my arsenal. My passport, the deeds to properties solely in my name, and crucially, the Ziploc bags containing samples of all the food he'd made me, and the bottle of Japanese vitamins. I felt like a fugitive in my own home. As I slipped out of the bedroom, I didn't dare look back at his sleeping form. I left a short note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to the Highlands to rest. Will call you. I love you." The last 3 words were the most difficult I've ever had to write. The moment I closed the front door behind me and breathed in the cool night air, I felt reborn. But I wasn't driving to the Southern Highlands. I drove straight into the heart of the Sydney CBD and checked into a suite at the Park Hyatt under a different name. This would be my war room. I had escaped, but I was still missing the final, undeniable piece of evidence: the smoking gun. I knew it had to be on his phone messages, search histories, something that would tie him directly to the poison, but he guarded that phone like it was his own heart. I couldn't just take it. I had to create a crisis so intense, so all-consuming, that he would be separated from it by his own carelessness. There are moments in life where you have to make a choice. You can be the victim of your story, or you can become its author. It's a terrifying leap of faith. Have you ever faced a moment that forced you to completely change the script of your own life? I made a call. Helen, it's time. The next afternoon, the trap was sprung. Helen, my loyal soldier, discovered a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar accounting error in the reports for our largest overseas investor. It was a phantom black hole, designed to look like a disaster that could bankrupt the company and ruin our reputation. She followed my script perfectly, calling an emergency, all-hands-on-deck meeting at the main office. Then, from my hotel room, I made my call, pitching my voice to sound weak and panicked. "Ethan," I cried into the phone. "Helen just called me. There's a huge problem at the office, something about the Takahashi account. It sounds apocalyptic. I know I'm meant to be resting, but you have to get down there, right now." The lure was out. He had no idea he wasn't running to save his company. He was running straight into the jaws of a trap I had set just for him. I arrived at the Wallace Holdings Tower 20 minutes before Ethan. I wasn't the frail, weak woman from the phone call anymore. I was dressed in a charcoal gray power suit, my hair pulled back in a severe bun, my face set like stone. I felt like a general preparing for the decisive battle. My loyal troops, Helen and our head of security, a formidable ex-military man named David, who had been with my father for decades, met me in the lobby. They knew their roles. The stage was set. Ethan burst into the 50th floor boardroom like a hurricane. He was already sweating, his tie loosened, his eyes wide with panic. The scene that greeted him was one of perfectly orchestrated chaos. Helen was pointing frantically at spreadsheets projected onto the wall, her voice trembling as she explained the multi-million-dollar black hole she'd found. Two other senior executives, both in on my plan, were arguing loudly about breach of contract clauses. And I was sitting at the head of the table, looking pale and holding a hand to my forehead as if the stress was physically breaking me. He didn't even give me a second glance. His entire focus was on the phantom disaster threatening to ruin him. Just as I'd predicted, he threw his jacket over a chair and tossed his keys and his phone onto the credenza by the door, his mind a million miles away. The bait was on the table. I let the chaos simmer for another 10 minutes, watching him get completely consumed by the fake numbers and panicked projections. Then, I made my move. I stood up slowly, swaying slightly for effect. I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice just loud enough to cut through the noise. "I feel incredibly dizzy. I need a moment." I started for the door, walking with a convincing unsteadiness. As I passed the credenza, my hand brushed against the polished wood, and in one fluid, almost invisible movement, my fingers closed around his phone. I slipped it into my pocket as I stumbled out of the room. No one noticed a thing. I walked down the hall to my father's old corner office, my office now, and locked the door behind me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had maybe 15 minutes, 20 at most. I pulled out the phone. The screen lit up, demanding a 6-digit passcode. "Think, Grace, think." My fingers flew across the screen. His birthday. Access denied. My birthday. Access denied. Our wedding anniversary. Access denied. Try again in 1 minute. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my skin. Time was slipping away. I was going to fail. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. What else mattered to him? What event? What person had eclipsed everything we had? And then, the cold, brutal truth hit me. There was only one other date that he would hold that sacred. My fingers, trembling with a fresh wave of pain, typed in the birthday of his son Noah. A date I had memorized from the private investigator's report. The phone unlocked. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It's a chilling moment when you realize the password to someone's life, the very key to their secrets, is a celebration of their greatest betrayal against you. It makes you wonder what other secrets people lock away in plain sight. I shoved the pain down, there was no time for it. I went straight to his messages. The conversation was pinned to the top, under Isla's name with a single heart emoji. The contents were more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. It was a logbook of my own murder. "Isla, is it working?" She looked tired in that photo she posted. "Ethan, the doctor said it's cumulative. It mimics cardiac fatigue. A few more weeks. We have to be patient, my love. Isla, I hate being patient. I want our life to start. I was looking at houses in Bellevue Hill today. Ethan, soon. Once she's gone, everything is ours. Her inheritance, the company, everything. Just keep playing your part." They were already spending my money. They were planning a future in the ashes of my life. My hands were shaking, but my mind was ice cold. I grabbed my own phone and, with methodical precision, I began to photograph every single screen of their vile conversation. Each flash of my camera was a nail being hammered into his coffin. I sent the images to my secure email, to my lawyer, and then wiped my phone. Just as I sent the last file, I heard footsteps approaching the office. A sharp knock. "Grace? Are you okay in there?" It was him. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my suit, and composed my face into a mask of calm neutrality. I unlocked the door. There he stood, still looking frantic. I held up his phone. "You left this," I said, my voice even. "A bit careless, don't you think?" He snatched it from my hand, his mind still on the crisis in the boardroom. He had no idea he'd just been handed back a ticking time bomb, and that I was the one holding the detonator. With the ultimate proof secured, the final act of my play could begin. I didn't want a quiet, private confrontation. I didn't want a sterile legal battle fought through lawyers. He had planned to erase me quietly, to let me fade away so he could step into my life. I decided his downfall would be the opposite, loud, public, and utterly spectacular. He had tried to make me invisible. I would make him the most infamous man in Sydney. The stage I chose was the grandest imaginable, the Wallace Holdings 40th Anniversary Gala. This wasn't just a company party. It was a landmark event, held in the grand ballroom of the Crown Sydney, with a guest list that was a who's who of Australian business and society. Industry titans, politicians, media moguls, everyone who mattered was there. It was a night to celebrate the legacy my father had built on integrity and trust, and it was the perfect place to expose the man who had tried to burn that legacy to the ground. I played the part of the gracious co-host to perfection. I wore a floor-length emerald green gown, a color that symbolized rebirth, and stood by Ethan's side as we greeted our guests. He was in his element, basking in the glow of the company's success, accepting congratulations with a smug, self-satisfied smile. He had no idea that the foundation of his world was about to be liquefied. He believed the financial crisis had been a false alarm, a simple clerical error Helen had found and fixed. He felt invincible. He looked at me, his loving wife, now seemingly recovered from her fatigue, and saw the perfect accessory to his triumph. After the dinner service, the speeches began. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. He stepped up to the podium, a portrait of confident leadership. He spoke eloquently about honor and vision. He thanked my father for his mentorship, and then he looked directly at me, his voice dripping with sickening sincerity. "But most of all," he said, raising his champagne flute, "I want to thank my beautiful, incredible wife, Grace. Her strength and support are the bedrock of my success. I would be nothing without her." The room erupted in applause. I smiled back at him, a serene, chilling smile that didn't reach my eyes. When the applause faded, I walked to the podium. A respectful hush fell over the ballroom. I looked out at the sea of faces, the pillars of the community, my father's oldest friends. Then I looked at Ethan. "Thank you, Ethan. That was a beautiful speech," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the speakers. "Tonight, we are celebrating a 40-year legacy. A legacy built on one simple principle: trust. So tonight, as we look to the future, I feel it's my duty to show you the truth of what has been happening to that legacy behind the scenes." On my subtle cue to a technician I had personally hired, the two enormous screens flanking the stage, which had been displaying the company logo, flickered to life. The first image was the photo I had taken of Ethan arriving at the Laura Lodge, his arms filled with designer shopping bags for his other family. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Before they could process it, the next slide appeared, a simplified summary of Helen's financial investigation, showing hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled from company accounts into a shell corporation, with the dates perfectly matching every luxury gift he had given Isla. The murmurs grew louder, more shocked. Ethan was frozen, his face turning a sickly shade of pale. But I had saved the best for last. The final slide appeared. It was the screenshot of his messages with Isla. The entire conversation. Their entire plan. The words were projected 10 feet high in stark, black and white clarity for the entire room to read. "The doctor said it's cumulative. It mimics cardiac fatigue. A few more weeks. We have to be patient, my love. Once she's gone, Everything is ours. The room fell into a deafening, absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, a collective gasp, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. There's a saying that everything done in the dark will eventually come to the light. It's a moment of terrifying and sometimes satisfying clarity. What do you think is the one secret that people believe they can keep, but never can? My voice, now as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, cut through the silence. I looked directly at my husband, who was staring at the screen in abject horror. "My husband, Ethan Cross," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority, "is not only a cheat and a thief who has betrayed my father and stolen from this company, he is also a man who was actively conspiring to murder me for my inheritance." I let the words hang in the air, a public indictment from which there was no escape. The celebration is over. His day of reckoning has just begun. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. 500 of the most powerful people in Australia were frozen in a state of collective shock, their champagne glasses half raised, their faces a gallery of disbelief and horror. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. All eyes were locked on Ethan, who stood spotlighted in the wreckage of his life, his face a canvas of ghastly white. Then, he shattered the silence. It wasn't with a confession or remorse, but with a primal scream of denial. "She's lying!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged towards the stage, his hands outstretched as if to physically claw back the truth I had just unleashed. "It's a setup. She's been unstable for months. The pressure, it's made her lose her mind. It's all fake." His words tumbled out, a frantic, pathetic attempt to repaint me as the villain. But the mask of the charming, eloquent CEO was gone, replaced by the snarling, desperate face of a cornered animal. It was the most honest I had ever seen him be. Before he could take another step, his path was blocked. David, my head of security, materialized at his side, a solid, immovable presence. Alongside him was another man in a sharp suit, who I knew to be a plainclothes detective I had arranged to have on the guest list. They didn't touch Ethan, but their presence was a clear, unbreachable wall. The sight of them, so professional and calm amidst his hysteria, sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. This wasn't just a marital spat playing out in public. This was something far more serious. And then, right on cue, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 2 uniformed NSW police officers walked in. They weren't running. They moved with a calm, deliberate authority that was far more terrifying than any siren. The crowd, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, parted for them like the Red Sea. They walked the long path through the ballroom, their boots silent on the plush carpet, their eyes fixed on one man. The party was officially over. One of the officers addressed Ethan, his voice polite but firm, carrying in the now silent room. "Mr. Ethan Cross, I'm Senior Constable Miller. We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding a conspiracy to commit murder." The formal, chilling words hung in the air. Ethan just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. No more lies left to tell. The officer gestured for him to turn around. And then came the sound that sealed his fate, the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs being latched around his wrists. The sound was as loud and final as a guillotine's fall. The walk from the head table to the exit was the longest walk of his life. The spell of shock was broken, and the room erupted. The flashes of cameras from the press photographers who had come to cover a gala and stumbled upon the crime of the decade lit up his face, capturing every flicker of his humiliation. He was no longer the golden boy CEO of Summit Property Group. He was a perp. He was a headline. He was nothing. I watched all of this unfold from the podium, my hands resting lightly on the lectern to stop them from shaking. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. I thought I would feel a rush of triumphant satisfaction, a sense of victory, but I felt nothing of the sort. I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. The war was over. I had won. But the battlefield was my own life, and the enemy was the man I had once loved more than anything. There is no hiding from the consequences of your actions. No matter how rich or powerful you are, the truth has a way of finding you, often in the most public way imaginable. Do you believe that people always get what they deserve in the end? The ballroom doors swung shut, swallowing him from view. The room was now a cacophony of frantic whispers and ringing phones. But in my own mind, there was only a vast, hollow silence. The monster was gone. The curtain had fallen. and I was left standing alone on the stage. I didn't stay to watch the chaos unfold. As the ballroom erupted into a maelstrom of flashing cameras and frantic gossip, David, my head of security, appeared at my side. He shielded me from the encroaching media, guiding me through a series of private corridors and service elevators, a silent and stoic guardian. We slipped out of the hotel and into the cool night, leaving the inferno I had ignited to burn on its own. I didn't go home. The house in Mosman was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, tainted with the ghosts of a life that was a lie. Instead, I had David drive me back to my sanctuary, my war room at the Park Hyatt. From the suite's panoramic window, I watched the distant, glittering lights of the city. The adrenaline from the public execution had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The war was won, but there was one last loose end to tie up, one last soldier on the battlefield who needed to be disarmed. Isla. I pictured her in our Lura lodge, sitting by the phone, probably waiting for a triumphant call from Ethan, waiting for the news that their glorious, blood-soaked future was one step closer. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I picked up the burner phone I had used to create Anna. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart rate was even. The emotional, heartbroken Grace was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, a woman who operated with the clinical precision of a surgeon. I dialed the number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and bubbly. Anna. Oh my God, I was literally just about to text you. I'm so bored up here. Did you decide on that Cartier bracelet we were looking at? I let her cheerful, oblivious chatter hang in the air for a moment before I spoke, my voice completely devoid of the warmth and friendship she knew. Isla, this isn't Anna. She was immediately confused. What? Who is this? How did you get this number? I ignored her questions. I'm calling to let you know that Ethan was arrested about an hour ago. What? The word was a sharp, panicked squeak. Arrested for what? This is some kind of sick joke, right? He's at a work thing tonight, a big gala. Yes, he was, I said, my voice flat and cold. That's where they arrested him. In front of 500 people. He was arrested for embezzling millions of dollars from his company and for conspiracy to commit murder. A choked, gasping sound came from her end of the line. No, she whispered. No, you're lying. He wouldn't. Whose murder? I let the silence stretch, twisting the knife. My murder, Isla. She started sobbing then, a torrent of panicked denials. No, it's his wife, that witch. She's setting him up. He loves me. He would do anything for me and Noah. Her desperate loyalty was almost pathetic. It was time for the final, devastating blow. He doesn't love you, Isla. He used you. That company you were so proud of? It was a wedding gift from my father. The lodge you're sitting in right now? I own it. The designer clothes on your back, the Rolex on your wrist, the car in the driveway. Every single thing he ever gave you, he bought with my money. You weren't his queen. You were just his most expensive hobby. She was just whimpering now, incoherent sounds of a world breaking apart. I leaned in for the kill. You spent all that time complaining to your best friend Anna about Ethan's horrible wife. You told her all your secrets. You should really know who you were talking to. I paused, letting my words land with the force of a physical impact. My name isn't Anna. My name is Grace, Grace Wallace. The sound that came through the phone was something I will never forget. It was a sharp, ragged gasp of pure, soul-shattering realization, followed by the distinct sound of the phone clattering to the floor. Then came a wail, an animalistic, gut-wrenching sound of absolute devastation. Truth is a powerful and sometimes brutal thing. It can set you free, but it can also shatter a world built on lies in an instant. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to deliver a truth, knowing it would change everything? I listened to her broken sobs for a few seconds more, a sound that was the final, dying echo of my old life. Then, I ended the call. The last loose end had been severed. It was done. All of it. And in the silent, glittering dark of the city, I felt utterly and completely alone. The aftermath of the gala was a media tsunami. The story of the high society CEO arrested for attempting to murder his heiress wife was a feeding frenzy for every news outlet in the country. My face was on the cover of every paper, my name a trending topic on every social media platform. I became a recluse, hounded by paparazzi who camped outside my hotel. I remained silent through it all, refusing all interviews, letting the evidence I had so meticulously gathered speak for me. And it spoke volumes. My lawyers took the mountain of proof I had given them and built a case that they described as an ironclad fortress. There was Helen's pristine documentation of the multi-million-dollar embezzlement, a paper trail that led directly from the company's accounts to Ethan's funding of Isla's lifestyle. There was the official toxicology report from a veterinary lab confirming that my poor Charlie had died from ingesting a slow-acting, difficult-to-trace cardiac poison. There were the hours of recordings of my conversations with Isla, where she, believing she was talking to her best friend Anna, laid bare their entire relationship. And of course, there was the crown jewel, the full, unedited transcript of the text messages from Ethan's phone, a step-by-step guide to their conspiracy, in their own damning words. Ethan's expensive legal team tried their best. They attempted to paint me as a scorned, vengeful wife, a manipulative woman using her family's wealth to frame an innocent man. But it was useless. How could they argue with bank statements? How could they refute a toxicology report? How could they possibly spin the words, "Once she's gone, everything is ours"? Isla, faced with the evidence of her own complicity, crumbled. Her defense was to turn on Ethan, portraying herself as a young, naive woman who had been manipulated by a powerful, older man. But the recordings and texts told a different story. They showed her as an ambitious and impatient co-conspirator, pushing him, encouraging him. Their great love affair dissolved into a cesspool of bitter, desperate accusations in separate police interrogation rooms, each one trying to save themselves by throwing the other under the bus. The trial was mercifully swift. I had to take the stand, a final, public ordeal. I remember looking at Ethan as he sat in the defendant's box. He was a ghost. The charismatic, confident man I had married was gone, replaced by a gaunt, gray-faced stranger who couldn't even meet my eye. I felt no hatred. I felt nothing at all. It was like looking at a character from a book I had read a long, long time ago. I told my story calmly, factually, my voice never wavering as I recounted the discovery, the deception, and the final, horrifying plot. The verdict was a formality. Guilty. On all charges. The sentencing came a week later. I was in the courtroom, sitting in the front row. I needed to see it through to the end. The judge looked down at Ethan, his expression one of utter contempt. For the extensive corporate fraud, the breach of fiduciary duty, and the conspiracy to commit aggravated assault with intent to murder, Ethan was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. For her role as a co-conspirator, Isla was sentenced to 10 years, with a minimum of 6. I watched her face crumple, the final, pathetic collapse of her materialistic dreams. She let out a sob as they led her away. Hearing the sentences, I didn't feel a rush of joy. I didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge. What I felt was a slow, profound, and quiet sense of relief. It was the feeling of a colossal weight I didn't even know I was still carrying, being gently lifted from my soul. Justice isn't always about celebrating a victory. Sometimes it's about the quiet relief of a chapter finally closing, allowing you to breathe again. What does the word justice truly mean to you? Is it revenge, or is it something else entirely? I walked out of the Downing Center courthouse and into the blinding Sydney Sunday. The scrum of reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing, but I didn't see them. I just looked up at the endless blue sky, took a deep, clean breath, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't looking back at the past. I was finally able to start looking forward. Once the courthouse doors closed behind me, the war was truly over. But victory, I soon discovered, is a strange and quiet country. The silence left behind by the departed storm was deafening. I was free, but I was also adrift in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. For a while, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent so many months being fueled by a single-minded mission of justice and revenge that, once it was accomplished, I felt a profound and unsettling emptiness. The question loomed in the quiet of my hotel suite. Who was I, now that I was no longer Ethan's wife, and no longer a woman at war? The first step back to myself wasn't emotional, it was practical. It was business. There was the matter of Summit Property Group, the company that was a monument to my husband's ambition and my family's betrayal. My first instinct was to dissolve it, to burn it to the ground and scatter its ashes to the wind. but I realized that would be letting him have one last, small victory. So, I chose to reclaim it instead. With Helen promoted to my official chief financial officer, we began a corporate cleansing. We initiated a formal merger, absorbing the smaller firm back into the behemoth of Wallace Holdings. We scrubbed its books clean, fired the sycophantic executives Ethan had hired, and dismantled the corrupt systems he had put in place. It was no longer a tainted entity. It became the new Wallace Development Division, and I stepped in as its managing director. It was a clear public statement. This was and always had been my family's legacy. I was taking it back. The professional rebuilding was the easy part. The personal rebuilding was a slower, messier process. I sold the house in Mosman, the place filled with so many happy memories that had all turned out to be lies. I couldn't bear to walk through its beautiful, empty rooms. I bought a penthouse apartment in Surrey Hills, a vibrant, artistic neighborhood that was entirely my own, filled with light and art and pieces that I chose for myself. Some days were good, filled with the excitement of my new role and the simple joy of my newfound freedom. Other days were hard, filled with a phantom, limb-like pain for the life I had lost and a deep, simmering anger that still needed a place to go. One afternoon, I drove to visit my father. His health was stable, but the ordeal had taken its toll. He looked at me with eyes full of a heartbreaking mixture of pride and guilt. "I'm so sorry, Gracie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I brought that monster into our lives. I trusted him." I took his hand, his once powerful grip now frail. "Your only mistake was loving me and wanting me to be happy," I told him, and I meant it. "He didn't break us, Dad. He made us stronger." In that moment of shared forgiveness, I felt a piece of myself click back into place. Slowly but surely, a new woman began to emerge from the ashes of the old one. I wasn't the naive, trusting girl who had fallen for a handsome, ambitious man. Nor was I the cold, calculating avenger who had plotted his downfall. I was someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal. I was sharper, more discerning, and commanded a quiet authority in the boardroom that surprised even myself. But I was also kinder, more empathetic, because I had seen the absolute worst in people and had chosen not to let it make me bitter. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I used to think that was such a cliché. But I learned that you're not just stronger, you're different, you're remade. The fire burns away the parts of you that weren't real anyway. Tell me about a time you had to rebuild yourself from the ground up, and who you became on the other side. One evening, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of my new office, looking down at the glittering tapestry of the Sydney skyline. For so long, I had seen myself only in relation to others, Richard Wallace's daughter, Ethan Cross's wife. But now, watching the city breathe below me, a city my family had helped build, a city I was now helping to shape, I finally saw myself for who I truly was. Not an heiress, not a victim, but a leader, a survivor, the master of my own destiny. My rebirth was complete. Years have passed since that final day in court. The seasons in Sydney have turned, painting the jacaranda trees in vibrant strokes of purple and washing the shores of Bondi clean again and again. The furious headlines have long since faded, replaced by new scandals and different stories. My old life feels like a film I watched a long time ago, the characters and plot points growing softer and more distant with each passing year. I still hear whispers now and then. Ethan was released from prison a while ago, having served the minimum of his sentence. He doesn't live in Sydney anymore. Someone said they saw him working a quiet, anonymous job in Melbourne, a grey, stooped figure, unrecognizable from the charismatic man who once commanded boardrooms. Isla served her time and disappeared, presumably taking her son, Noah, to start over somewhere far from the ghosts of their past. I hold no ill will towards them. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you give to others because they deserve it. It's something you give yourself because you deserve peace. Resentment is too heavy a burden to carry into a new life. My own life is full, but in a way I never expected. My work at Wallace Holdings has been more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. We've built community centers, funded green housing projects, and changed the skyline for the better. But my greatest joy is found in the quiet moments. It's in the weekly dinners with my father, his health now stable, his laughter filling my apartment. It's in the friendships I've nurtured, real bonds built on trust and mutual respect. It's in the simple pleasure of walking along the coast at sunrise, feeling the salt spray on my face, completely and utterly free. I never remarried. I found that the love I was searching for wasn't in another person, but within myself. I am my own rock, my own safe harbor. From the balcony of my apartment, I often look out at the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of stories. I think about the woman who drove up to the mountains that fateful day, so full of love and naive hope. I don't mourn for her anymore. I thank her for her strength, for walking through the fire so that I could be born. My past shaped me, but it does not define me. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, I was not just reborn. I learned how to fly.